After the suffocating battle between Hank and the cousins, everyone finally calmed down. Because of Hank's injury, Walter spent more time with his family. Skylar's stance had a noticeable shift. Gus, on the other hand, had a triumphant moment. This episode could be considered a transitional one. Skylar stopped causing trouble, and Walter and Jesse started working together again. Hank's investigation into Heisenberg encountered obstacles. Walter and Jesse began a standardized production process, but when Jesse saw that there was still some product left over after completing the weekly 200-pound quota, he foolishly thought he could keep some for himself and resell it. Objectively speaking, we have to say Jesse was being naive. If Gus found out, Jesse wouldn't even know how he died. Jesse's reasoning was that Gus's profits from selling the contraband far exceeded the combined earnings of Jesse and Walter. However, he didn't consider Gus's initial investments, his accumulated resources and connections over the years, and the greater risks he was bearing. Jesse was just an employee. Without Walter's unique demand for Jesse wouldn't even qualify to be in that lab. Jesse's idea was simply delusional. After deciding to steal some contraband, Jesse enlisted Badger and Skinny Pete to help, targeting the addicts in the rehab center. Jesse's mind is made up. Jesse found a lawyer, Saul, to discuss money laundering. Saul gave Jesse money laundering commission is 17%, compared to Walter's 5% fee. Saul's was more than 3 times higher, which annoyed Jesse. As someone who was always looked down upon compared to Walter, Jesse hated being treated differently, so he was dissatisfied with Saul's suggestion. If not for Walter's 5% fee setting a benchmark, Jesse probably would have accepted the 17%. Meanwhile, since Walter signed the divorce papers, Skylar had stopped seeing Ted. This proved that Skylar only cheated to leave Walter. She liked Ted but didn't love him. After Walter signed the divorce papers, Skylar abandoned Ted. Ted wanted a commitment, so he went to Skylar's house to find her, but he was turned away. On Hank's side, he recalled that someone had warned him of danger 1 minute before the attack. It was Gus, with a disguised voice. Upon hearing Hank's recollection, Walter began to ponder Gus's actions. Skylar also sensed a connection between the incident and Walter, so she privately questioned him in the car.
Are we safe?
Yes,
Are you safe?
absolutely.
With 2 simple questions, Skylar felt she understood everything. Walter was very guilty because the cousins had come to kill him, and he had no idea. Without Gus, Walter might have been the one lying there, so he sought out Gus for clarification. During their conversation, Walter thanked Gus for his help. Gus proposed extending their partnership while allowing for termination at any time, guaranteeing Walter's family's safety. Although Walter wasn't keen on continuing their business, he needed to ensure his family's safety and owed Gus a huge favor, so he agreed to Gus's terms. In this scene, both Walter and Gus had faces half in shadow, symbolizing their testing of each other's limits. Much like the stark line of light and shadow on their faces, both were hiding something, with their own plans in mind. For now, they continued their seemingly stable cooperation on the surface. After the conversation, Walter drove home, pressing the gas pedal hard, closing his eyes, and speeding forward, crossing the yellow line onto the opposite lane, nearly crashing into a truck. This indicated that Walter had just survived an extraordinarily terrifying ordeal. Hank's attack left Walter deeply unsettled, filled with confusion and fear. The diagnosis for Hank was that without sufficient medical expenses, he might be confined to a wheelchair forever. Marie couldn't accept this reality and insisted on getting the best doctors for Hank, regardless of the cost. Skylar told Marie that Walter and she had money to help pay for Hank's medical bills. This left Walter flustered, not because he was stingy, but because he feared Skylar might reveal his illegal activities. When Skylar lied, saying the money came from Walter's gambling, Walter finally breathed a sigh of relief. He wasn't concerned about the money and readily agreed. Considering that Hank took a bullet for him, Walter was more than willing to pay the expenses. As long as his identity remained hidden, this was his way of compensating Hank, at least in his mind. Walter admired Skylar's quick thinking, but Skylar's response left him feeling very awkward.
I learned from the best.
A woman's intuition told Skylar that Hank's situation was definitely connected to Walter.
Something tells me that Hank is here because of you. And I'm not forgetting that.
This is the most controversial episode in Breaking Bad, where the director had the main character Walter spend the entire episode swatting a fly. There are a lot of interpretations of swatting flies. but the real reason that can be proven is very real. Due to the budget overruns from building the super lab this season, the director opted to complete this episode with a very low budget. However, a low budget doesn't mean the content is poor. The symbolism and theme of this episode are very clear. It is said that the inspiration came from the famous 19th century German chemist Robert, who had a story related to flies and meticulousness. Walter noticed that the final weight of the product was always slightly off. He mumbled to himself, fearing there might be surveillance in the lab. So he didn't confront Jesse directly. Jesse came over, pretended to suggest a few possibilities, and then left. At that moment, Walter already suspected that Jesse was the one taking the extra product. Just as Walter was feeling depressed, a fly suddenly started bothering him, and he began to focus on catching it. The fly represents a contaminant and symbolizes Walter's tainted soul. What did Walter experience before he started swatting the fly? He knew someone was coming to kill him, and he saw the legless Lionel crawling towards him. He saw the hitmen leave Hank paralyzed from the waist down. He knew Jesse was stealing product from the lab. He knew that if Gus found out, he would go after Jesse. Skylar also saw through him, understanding that Hank's attack was closely related to him. All of this put enormous pressure on Walter. There's no doubt that Hank's situation was Walter's fault, although Gus was the mastermind. Without Walter, Hank wouldn't have gotten involved. Previously, Marie hinted at the truth with one sentence.
Miss Pinkman? Hank was looking for. Hank would have never even heard his name if you hadn't bought marijuana from him.
Marie.
Did you ever think about that, Walt? Do you? Do you ever think about everything that you have put him through?
After implicating his brother-in-law, Walter remembered the last person he had gotten killed was Jesse's girlfriend, Jane. In this episode, Walter revealed the truth about Jane's death and expressed his guilt to Jesse. However, Jesse was too focused on swatting the fly to grasp Walter's meaning. There's also a detail where Jesse put sleeping pills in Walter's coffee midway through the episode. Walter finally expressed his guilt about Jane to Jesse when he was barely able to keep his eyes open, just about to fall asleep. After confessing his guilt to Jesse, Walter stopped obsessing over the fly and let Jesse handle it. Although Jesse ultimately killed the fly symbolized Jane's death as a stain on Walter's soul. Walter expressed his guilt to Jesse. He no longer fixated on the fly and fell into a restful sleep. Walter's guilt over Jane's death caused him great turmoil in this episode, and he projected his emotions onto the fly. Walter was conflicted not just about Jane's death but also about how he engaged in illegal activities for his family. Even though he made money, he faced losing his family and divorcing Skylar. Originally, everything was for his family. Walter recalled his actions, trying to find a point where he could make money and retire cleanly. That point was right after his first deal with Gus when he deposited money into his son's donation website, returned Jesse's money, and the two parted ways. As it turned out, Walter didn't give up on Jesse, nor did he make a perfect exit. He is still involved in producing contraband. Although it was profitable, it left him physically and mentally exhausted. Walter didn't even want that much money. In this episode, to hint at Jane's significance, the director included a shot where Jesse, arriving at work, saw ashes in a cigarette but with a pink lipstick stain, clearly left by Jane. Thus, the fly symbolized Jane as an indelible stain on Walter's soul and reflected his conflicted and complex state of mind. Additionally, the fly also symbolizes Jesse, as he stole the extra contraband. In the past, when Walter and Jesse independently sold contraband, they faced numerous crises and deaths. After finally stabilizing the situation, the two teamed up again. Now, they could make $5 million and go home to live comfortably, but Jesse just wouldn't listen and insisted on reselling the leftover contraband. Jesse, like a fly, always messed up the stable situation, reflecting his stupidity and immaturity. After work, once they confirmed it was safe, Walter advised Jesse to stop stealing contraband and warned him that if Gus found out, the consequences would be severe, and he wouldn't be able to protect him. But Jesse stubbornly ignored Walter's advice. A foolish teammate is always a foolish teammate. Like a contaminant fly in a team. What are your thoughts on this fly swatting episode? Having an incompetent teammate like Jesse is a constant source of worry. To prevent the reckless Jesse from stealing contraband again, Walter kept a close eye on him, giving him no chance to act. Walter even insisted on handling the weighing process himself. Jesse was very displeased and strongly protested, but Walter reminded him to be careful as there might be surveillance. After work, Jesse went straight to the rehab center to check with Badger and Skinny Pete about their sales. To Jesse's shock, not only had they sold nothing, but they were also planning to go straight, influenced by the other members in rehab, to set an example for his subordinates. Jesse found a target and initiated a conversation.
Oh, hey, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Andrea, right?
Yeah.
Hey, my name's Jesse. And, I don't really want to be here either. Oh, sorry.
Jesse approached Andrea because he noticed her speech during a group meeting.
My name is Andrea.
We don't bite. No judgments. You can be as open and honest as you want to be.
Honestly, I don't want to be here.
The scene changes and Jesse goes straight back to Andrea's house with Andrea. While flirting with Andrea, Jesse deliberately mentioned the feeling he got from using contraband and hinted that he could get the latest blue contraband. Just as they were about to take things a step further, there was a sudden arrival at the house. Andrea's son had returned. Jesse was stunned to find out that his target was a single mom. Andrea was unaware of Jesse's true intentions, believing he genuinely wanted to date her. Andrea invited Jesse to dinner with her son. Jesse liked the child very much, as evidenced by how he cared for Spudge's son before. Having been neglected by his own parents, Jesse deeply empathized with abandoned children. Thus, not harming children was Jesse's bottom line, laying the groundwork for future plot developments. After returning home and when the child was not around, their relationship progressed further. Andrea offered to try some of Jesse's blue contraband, but Jesse suddenly didn't want to give it to her and angrily asked, "What kind of mother are you?" Hearing this, Andrea flipped out, asking if he came to her house just to judge her. Seeing that Andrea is about to get angry, Jesse apologizes because they have only been together for a short period of time and don't know each other well at all. Jesse sensed Andrea had something on her mind, prompting her to open up to him. Andrea didn't hold back and talked about her 10-year-old son Tomas, who was lured by a gang and ended up shooting someone. From Andrea's detailed account, Jesse realized that the person Tomas killed was likely his friend Combo. To confirm his suspicion, Jesse went to the spot where Combo was killed. Sure enough, Tomas was still there, riding his bike and selling contraband. Jesse pretended to buy some. After Tomas stated the price, two men arrived in a car, took the money, and left. Tomas handed the product to Jesse, confirming Jesse's suspicion that Tomas was the one who killed Combo under their orders. Meanwhile, to ensure Walter's funds for Hank's medical bills were clean, Skylar, with her accounting background, decided to review Walter's money laundering methods. Walter took his wife to meet Saul for the first time. Skylar, who never wore black, was dressed in a black shirt, indicating her descent into darkness. Skylar's green scarf also represents Walter's theme color, suggesting that their relationship has become stronger. Upon learning that Saul had arranged for Walter to launder money through an investment in a laser tag business, Skylar disagreed, saying it didn't fit Walter's style. Skylar then took Walter to the car wash where he used to work, because Walter understood the car wash business. Investing in and running it wouldn't raise suspicion. Walter agreed with Skylar's suggestion. Walter called Saul to inspect the place. Saul, however, said he had no contacts there and stressed the need for someone trustworthy to handle such a discreet operation. That evening, Walter discussed with Skylar the idea of following Saul's advice. Given Saul's expertise as a lawyer, after a moment's thought, Skylar decided to play his own profession to help Walter launder the money. Walter was firmly against her involvement, citing the signed divorce papers and his willingness to bear the risk alone to protect the family. But Skylar pointed out that she never submitted the divorce application, so they were still legally married. Moreover, since Walter's dirty money was used for the family, Skylar had become an accomplice. Walter reluctantly agreed to let her help. The next day, Gus invited Walter to his home. Walter was very anxious, unable to understand Gus's intentions. Finally, Gus reminded Walter to learn how to be a wealthy man. The implication was that Walter needed to launder his money properly to avoid any trouble, as it would also be detrimental to Gus. He warned Walter not to make the same mistake twice. This was a reminder for Walter to control Jesse and prevent him from causing trouble that could affect Gus's business. Otherwise, their deaths would be ugly. But with a teammate like Jesse, do you think he can stay out of trouble?
Run.
Jesse found the killers of Combo and vowed to avenge him. He hurried to find Walter and showed him the blue contraband he bought from the killers. It was exactly the contraband they had produced, meaning the killers worked for Gus. Jesse told Walter about Combo's death and declared he was going to get revenge. He wanted Walter to give him some ricin, as he discovered the killers often had their friend Wendy deliver takeout, and he planned to use Wendy to poison them, but Walter strongly disagrees with Jesse's plan because he knows it's Jesse's spur-of-the-moment idea and they are still Gus's men. Walter didn't have much attachment to Combo, but Jesse did. Combo was his childhood friend, and not avenging him would weigh heavily on his conscience. Moreover, they used an innocent child as a pawn, and that child was his new girlfriend's eldest son. These factors compelled Jesse to seek revenge. Even without Walter's help, Jesse was determined to find another way to get poison. After a conversation, Jesse quickly convinced Wendy to help and left her a big bag of contraband as payment. The plan was set to start the next morning. To prevent Jesse from doing something foolish, Walter sought Saul's help, but they couldn't come up with a good solution. That night, while Walter was alone at home taking care of his daughter, Mike suddenly showed up. Mike had learned about Jesse's plan from Saul, and to protect Gus's interests, he advised Walter not to risk himself for a junkie like Jesse. Mike shared a story from his younger days as a cop dealing with a domestic violence case where he made a similar mistake, leading to a tragedy he vowed never to repeat. This echoed Gus's earlier warning to Walter. The next day, Jesse and Wendy waited at the plaza, but the killers never showed up. Then, Mike appeared and took a bewildered Jesse away. At Gus's chicken farm, Jesse saw Walter's car. Jesse felt uneasy as he entered to find everyone, including the two killers, waiting for him. Gus got straight to the point, saying both sides were responsible for Combo's death. He ordered Jesse and his men to reconcile and stop acting like children. Gus warned Jesse that if not for Walter, he would have dealt with him very differently. Gus's powerful presence nearly intimidated Jesse into submission.
No. Jesse. Pardon me?
These kids. These assholes of yours that got an 11-year-old kid doing their killing for them. You're supposed to be some kind of reasonable businessman. This is how you do business? You okay with this?
Evidently, Jesse had a valid point. Gus made a concession, forbidding his men from using children, while also demanding Jesse cease his antics. Both parties shook hands and made peace in front of Gus. On the way back, Walter urged Jesse to learn to compromise, but Jesse wouldn't listen. Still angry at Walter, at the parking lot, Jesse got out and ran off like a rebellious teenager, with Walter playing the exasperated father. Here is the final shot for Thomas. That night, Jesse was relaxing with Andrea when she received the devastating news of Tomas's death. Seeing his heartbroken girlfriend, Jesse also panicked in his heart. He never thought that the two murderers were so cruel. The next day, Jesse couldn't even bring himself to go to work. Walter called multiple times but got no answer. After work, Walter continued trying to reach Jesse but still couldn't get through. Walter was deeply worried, fearing Jesse might do something reckless. Coincidentally, Walter saw the news about Tomas's murder on TV, and a sense of foreboding overcame him. He knew why Jesse hadn't answered all day, so he quickly found an excuse to leave. As expected, Jesse's side has been waiting for the opportunity to move. See the target appeared. Jesse took out the ready pistol. Sensing Jesse's intent, they also cocked their weapons. Just as the three were about to fire, Walter arrived in time, crashing into the two men. Seeing one of them still alive, Walter quickly grabbed the fallen gun and, without hesitation, shot him in the head. This action left Jesse stunned. Walter risked everything to save Jesse, not only because he had a special bond with him, a bond that exceeded that with his own son. Jesse was there for Walter at his lowest point, and this was also a way to repay Jesse. Jane's death left Walter with a lingering guilt, as highlighted in the fly swatting episode. Moreover, Gus still needed Walter, making it less likely for him to be killed. Weighing all these factors, Walter decided to take action. If you were Walter, would you have done the same? To protect Jesse, Walter killed two of Gus's men, leading Gus to summon him for a reprimand. This time, Walter donned his iconic black hat. The hat had only appeared in the third season, and Walter wearing it this time signified Heisenberg's emergence, giving him immense confidence. The first time Walter wore the hat was during a deal with Tuco. The second time was when Walter met with Badger instead of Jesse and announced himself as Heisenberg. The third time is now, when Walter meets Gus alone. Each time Walter wears this hat, it marks a significant step on his dark path. Facing Gus's interrogation, Walter offers two choices. The first is that Gus kills him now and then finds and kills Jesse. The second is that he continues working for Gus, sparing Jesse. Clearly, Gus can only choose the second option, to maintain control. Gus arranges for Gale to become Walter's assistant again and has his subordinate Victor constantly monitor them. Gale still idolizes Walter just as he did before. Gale was very happy to get Walter's approval and returned home, singing and dancing to the rhythm of classical music, which was his only hobby besides chemistry. Just then, Gus suddenly visits. He asks Gale, using Walter's illness as an excuse, when he can work independently from Walter. Gale modestly said that they might need to make a few more batches of contraband together, which was clearly not the answer Gus wanted. Gale also guesses that Gus wants him to be independent as soon as possible, so he promises to make it again and learn it. Gus nods in satisfaction. The next day at work, Gale looks worriedly at Walter, with Victor watching them. He can't warn Walter. Meanwhile, to find Jesse for Gus, Mike goes to Saul's office. In order to protect his client's privacy, Saul sticks to his work ethic, but Mike doesn't buy into it. Seeing that Mike was about to get tough, Saul said, "I won't tell you, Jesse's address is on my desk." Then he excused himself to go out for a while. What Mike doesn't know was that Saul provides a fake address. Saul then takes Walter to Jesse's hiding place. In reality, Jesse hasn't run away. He's just been hidden by Saul. Walter realizes Gus wants Gale to replace him. To save himself, Gale must die, because Walter is constantly watched by Saul's men. He doesn't have a chance to kill Gale himself, so he wants Jesse to do it. Jesse advises Walter to turn himself in, but Walter firmly refuses. Jesse says he can't bring himself to kill Gale, leaving Walter no choice but to do it himself. But he doesn't know Gale's address and has no chance to follow Gale. Walter asks Jesse to find Gale's address for him. After all, Walter just saved Jesse's life, so Jesse doesn't refuse Walter's request. That night, Jesse gives Walter Gale's address, noting there's no surveillance around. Without delay, Walter decides to act immediately. However, as he's about to drive to Gale's place, Victor shows up, claiming there's an issue with the lab equipment and insists Walter come with him, not allowing Walter to drive. Walter realizes his death is imminent. He desperately pleads, but Mike is unmoved. In desperation, Walter thinks of a way to get Jesse to kill Gale, giving him a chance to survive. So Walter deliberately says he knows Jesse's whereabouts and asks to call him out. Mike thought this would save him the trouble of finding Jesse, so he decided to eliminate them both together. Therefore, Mike didn't stop Walter from making the call. Jesse answers and asks if Walter has killed Gale. Walter explains his situation and says it's up to Jesse now. Jesse, having the advantage of proximity, needs to act. Mike realizes he's been tricked and snatches Walter's phone, but it's too late. Seeing Walter in danger, Jesse heads straight to Gale's place without hesitation.
Just what the hell was that? Exactly.
You might want to hold off.
Yeah? Why?
Because your boss is gonna need me. 6353 Juan Tabo, apartment 6.
Hearing Walter mention Gale's address, Victor immediately rushes to stop him. Mike calls Gale, but Gale's phone is on vibrate, and with the loud music, he doesn't hear it. At this moment, Gale hears a knock at the door. Opening it, he sees Jesse with a gun. Seeing Jesse's distressed state, Gale knows his pleas are futile. With a gunshot, the third season ends. The close-ups during Walter's confrontation with Jane's death and Jesse facing Gale's death highlight their brilliant performances. Both scenes show similar psychological struggles. Walter with Jane and Jesse with Gale both feel they don't want to kill the other, but for their own interests, Jane and Gale have to die. Over the course of 2 seasons, Jesse and Walter's relationship was fraught with constant conflict. However, by the end of the 3rd season, their bond had grown stronger as they faced the powerful adversary, Gus. Together,